The lone rancher saves a pregnant widow from a wild mountain lion, and they build a life together. Today, we're diving into a powerful story from the American frontier, where survival, courage, and unexpected love converge in the rugged wilderness of the Old West. You'll witness how a chance encounter between a solitary rancher and a desperate woman changes both their lives forever. Before we begin, if you already enjoy this type of content, leave your like to support me. The scorching summer sun of 1882 beat down mercilessly on the dusty trails of Montana Territory, where vast expanses of prairie grass swayed in the relentless wind. Thomas McKinnon guided his weathered horse along the familiar path toward the nearest trading post, his calloused hands gripping the reins with the ease of a man who had spent 15 years working the land alone. At 35, Thomas carried the weight of solitude like a second skin, his ranch sprawling across 2,000 acres of unforgiving terrain, where he raised cattle and lived by his own rules, far from the complications of civilization. The August heat shimmered off the rocky outcroppings that dotted the landscape, creating mirages that danced before his tired eyes. Thomas had been riding since dawn, checking fence lines and water sources, preparing for the harsh winter that would inevitably follow. His ranch, the Double T, sat nestled in a valley between two mountain ranges, providing natural protection from the worst of the weather, but also ensuring his isolation from the nearest neighbors who lived a full day's ride away. As he crested a small hill, the sound that stopped him cold wasn't the familiar lowing of cattle or the whistle of wind through the pines. It was a woman's scream, raw, desperate, and terrified. Thomas spurred his horse toward the sound, his heart hammering against his ribs as he navigated through a grove of aspen trees, whose golden leaves rustled ominously in the breeze. Breaking through the tree line, he witnessed a scene that would haunt his dreams for years to come. A young woman, heavy with child and dressed in a torn blue dress that had seen better days, pressed herself against a massive boulder while a mountain lion, easily 8 feet from nose to tail, stalked her with predatory patience. The woman's dark hair had escaped its pins, framing a face pale with terror, and her hands instinctively protected her swollen belly as she tried to make herself as small as possible against the unforgiving stone. Thomas didn't hesitate. Years of frontier living had honed his reflexes to razor sharpness, and he drew his Winchester rifle in one fluid motion while dismounting from his horse. The mountain lion's yellow eyes fixed on him as he positioned himself between the predator and the woman, his boots finding purchase on the loose gravel as he raised the weapon to his shoulder. "Easy there, big fellow," Thomas murmured, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The mountain lion's ears flattened against its head, muscles coiling like springs beneath its tawny coat. Behind him, he could hear the woman's labored breathing, punctuated by small whimpers of fear that tore at his heart. The standoff lasted an eternity that probably measured only seconds. The mountain lion's tail twitched with predatory calculation, weighing its chances against this new threat. Thomas kept his rifle trained on the animal's chest, knowing he would have only one shot to make this count. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of fear and desperation, and in that moment, the mountain lion made its decision. The big cat launched itself through the air with terrifying grace, covering the distance between them in a heartbeat. Thomas fired, the crack of the rifle echoing off the surrounding rocks like thunder. The bullet found its mark, and the mountain lion crashed to the ground in a cloud of dust and dying leaves, its threat forever ended. If you're enjoying the video so far, a like and subscribe to the channel really helps a lot. Thomas immediately turned to the woman, who had slumped against the boulder as the reality of her rescue sank in. Tears streamed down her dirt-stained cheeks, and her whole body shook with the aftermath of terror. She was younger than he had initially thought, perhaps 23 or 24, with intelligent brown eyes that spoke of education and refinement, though her current circumstances suggested anything but comfort. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Thomas asked gently, setting his rifle aside and approaching her with the same careful movements he used around spooked horses. She shook her head mutely, one hand still protectively cradling her belly, while the other gripped the rough stone behind her for support. I thought I was going to die," she whispered, her voice carrying the refined accent of someone from back east. "My baby. We both would have—" She couldn't finish the sentence, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had almost happened. Thomas removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair as he studied her condition. She was clearly in the advanced stages of pregnancy, probably 7 or 8 months along, and the stress of the encounter had left her dangerously pale. More concerning were the signs of recent hardship. Her dress was not just torn, but showed evidence of days of hard travel. Her shoes were worn through at the soles, and there was a hollowness in her cheeks that spoke of insufficient food. "What's your name, Mom?" Thomas asked, offering her his water canteen. She accepted it gratefully, taking small sips as color slowly returned to her face. "Elizabeth. Elizabeth Morrison," she replied, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "I was traveling to Carson Creek to meet my late husband's brother, but my wagon broke down 2 days ago. I've been walking ever since, trying to find help or a settlement." Thomas felt his heart sink at her words. Carson Creek was a good 40 miles southeast, and the trail she would have needed to follow had been washed out by spring floods. She had been walking in completely the wrong direction, heading deeper into wilderness that could kill even experienced frontiersmen. "Mrs. Morrison, Carson Creek is—" he began, then stopped himself. She didn't need to hear how lost she had become. Not in her condition. "My ranch isn't far from here. You need food and rest before we figure out how to get you where you're going." Elizabeth's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were tears of relief rather than fear. "I can't impose on your kindness, Mr. McKinnon, Thomas McKinnon, and it's not an imposition, ma'am. It's what any decent person would do." He gestured toward his horse, a sturdy bay gelding that had carried him faithfully for 8 years. "Can you ride? We'll take it slow and easy." As Thomas helped Elizabeth to her feet, he noticed the way she moved, careful and deliberate, one hand always supporting her back. The baby was due soon, probably within the next month, and the thought of what might have happened if he hadn't come along this particular trail at this particular moment sent a chill through him, despite the blazing heat. The ride back to his ranch house took nearly 2 hours, with Thomas walking alongside his horse to ensure Elizabeth's comfort and safety. They spoke little during the journey, but he found himself stealing glances at her face, noting the determined set of her jaw and the way she held herself with dignity despite her circumstances. There was strength in this woman, a resilience that had kept her going when lesser people might have given up entirely. As they finally crested the hill that overlooked his property, Thomas saw his humble home through her eyes, a solid log cabin with a stone chimney surrounded by well-maintained corrals and outbuildings that spoke of a man who took pride in his work. It wasn't much compared to what she was probably used to back east, but it was honest and clean and safe. "Welcome to the Double T," Thomas said simply, helping her down from the horse. "You'll be safe here, Mrs. Morrison. I give you my word on that." The interior of Thomas McKinnon's cabin reflected the practical simplicity of a man who had learned to rely solely on himself. Hand-hewn furniture filled the single large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and parlor, while a stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel adorned with a few treasured books and a daguerreotype of a stern-faced couple Thomas had never spoken about. Elizabeth settled gratefully into the rocking chair beside the hearth, her swollen ankles throbbing with relief as Thomas bustled about the kitchen with surprising competence. "I hope you don't mind simple fare," Thomas said, stoking the fire beneath a cast-iron pot. "I've got beef stew that's been simmering since morning, fresh biscuits, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead." He paused, glancing at her condition. "Though perhaps tea would be more suitable for you right now." Elizabeth watched him move about the kitchen with economical grace, noting the way he instinctively knew where everything belonged. This was clearly a man comfortable in his own space, yet she sensed an underlying loneliness in the way he seemed almost surprised to have someone to care for. "Mr. McKinnon, I cannot express how grateful I am for your kindness. In my condition, alone out there," she shuddered, not wanting to complete the thought. "Please, call me Thomas. And there's no need for thanks between neighbors, even temporary ones." He ladled the stew into a ceramic bowl, the rich aroma filling the cabin with warmth and comfort. "Tell me about your husband, if you don't mind. What brought you out to this territory?" As Elizabeth accepted the bowl with trembling hands, her story unfolded like pages from a tragedy. She and her husband James had been school teachers in Philadelphia, drawn west by stories of opportunity and the promise of land grants for educators willing to establish schools in frontier communities. James had been offered a position in Carson Creek, along with a small homestead where they could build their future together. "We were so excited," Elizabeth said, her voice growing distant with memory. "James used to read me letters from his brother Michael, describing the mountains and the endless sky. It sounded like paradise compared to the crowded streets and smoky air of the city." She took a small bite of stew, closing her eyes as the nourishment spread warmth through her body. "We left Philadelphia in April, just after we learned about the baby. James said it would be perfect timing. We'd arrive before the birth, get settled, and start our new life as a family." Thomas settled into the chair across from her, his own bowl forgotten as he listened to her tale. The firelight flickered across her face, highlighting the exhaustion that ran deeper than physical fatigue. This was a woman who had endured more than anyone should have to bear. "The cholera took him outside of Kansas City," Elizabeth continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "One day he was fine, talking about names for the baby and planning our house. 3 days later," she set down her spoon, unable to continue eating as the memories overwhelmed her. "I'm sorry," Thomas said simply, the words inadequate but sincere. He had seen enough death on the frontier to recognize the particular grief of sudden loss, the way it left survivors feeling unmoored, as if the very ground beneath their feet had become unreliable. The wagon train leader wanted to turn back, said a pregnant widow had no business continuing west alone. But Michael's last letter had included money for supplies and passage to Carson Creek. "I had nothing left in Philadelphia. We'd sold everything to make this journey, so I hired a guide and pressed on." Elizabeth's laugh held no humor. "The guide took my money and disappeared with most of my supplies outside of Denver. I've been making my way alone ever since." Thomas felt anger rise in his chest at the thought of someone abandoning a pregnant woman in the wilderness. Such men gave the frontier a bad name, preying on the vulnerable instead of upholding the code of mutual assistance that kept people alive in harsh country. "How long since you've had a proper meal?" 3 days, maybe 4. "I've been rationing what little I had left." Elizabeth resumed eating, this time with more purpose. "I know I shouldn't have attempted to cross that mountain pass alone, but I could see vultures circling in the distance and I was so frightened." "You did what you had to do to survive," Thomas assured her. "That takes more courage than most people possess." He watched as color slowly returned to her cheeks, the simple act of eating beginning to restore her strength. "Mrs. Morrison, Elizabeth, I have to tell you something about Carson Creek." She looked up from her bowl, reading something in his expression that made her tense. "What is it?" "The settlement was abandoned last winter. Harsh weather, failed crops, and Apache raids drove most families away. Michael Morrison." Thomas hesitated, then pressed on with gentle honesty. "He died of pneumonia in February. There's nothing left there for you now." The spoon slipped from Elizabeth's fingers, clattering against the bowl as the last of her hopes crumbled. She had endured her husband's death, abandonment, near starvation, and a mountain lion attack, all sustained by the belief that sanctuary waited for her in Carson Creek. Now even that fragile dream was gone. Thomas moved quickly to her side as tears began streaming down her face. "I'm sorry to be the bearer of such news. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." "What am I going to do?" Elizabeth whispered, her hands protectively covering her belly. "I have no money, no family, nowhere to go. This baby will be born in a few weeks, and I have nothing to offer it. Leave your comment about what you think of this story so far." Thomas knelt beside her chair, his weathered hands gentle as he offered her his handkerchief. "You have more than nothing. You have strength, intelligence, and the will to keep fighting when most people would have given up. Those are valuable qualities anywhere, but especially out here." "But practically speaking," Elizabeth began. "Practically speaking, you're welcome to stay here as long as you need," Thomas interrupted. "The cabin has a back room that would serve as a nursery. I've got livestock that provides milk and eggs, a vegetable garden, and enough supplies to last through winter. You could help with cooking and mending, maybe teach me to read better. I never got much schooling as a boy." Elizabeth stared at him through her tears, struggling to comprehend such generosity from a virtual stranger. "You don't even know me. Why would you open your home to someone who can offer so little in return?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire as he searched for words to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. "I've been alone on this land for 15 years, built this place with my own hands, raised cattle, survived blizzards and droughts, and more than a few encounters with unfriendly wildlife. I thought I was content with solitude, but maybe—" He turned to meet her eyes. "Maybe I was just waiting for the right reason to let someone else into my life." The honesty in his voice broke down the last of Elizabeth's resistance to accepting help. She had been raised to be independent, to contribute rather than burden others, but her current circumstances left her with little choice but to trust in the kindness of this unexpected savior. "I would earn my keep," she said firmly. "I may be pregnant, but I'm not helpless. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, and once the baby comes—" She paused, a new worry creasing her brow. "Thomas, I don't know anything about frontier birthing. In Philadelphia, there were doctors and midwives. There's a woman about 10 miles south, Martha Hendricks. She's helped deliver half the babies in 3 counties. When your time comes, I'll fetch her." Thomas rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the vast expanse of his land. "Elizabeth, I want you to understand something. This isn't charity. Life out here is hard, and it's easier when people work together. You need a place to heal and build a future for your child. I need—" He stopped, then continued with characteristic honesty. "I need to remember what it feels like to have a purpose beyond just surviving." As the evening wore on, they talked quietly about practical arrangements. Elizabeth would take the main room, while Thomas moved his bedroll to the barn until proper accommodations could be arranged. She would help with domestic duties as her condition allowed, and in return, she would have a safe place to bring her child into the world. But beneath the practical discussions lay something neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. A sense of rightness, as if fate had deliberately orchestrated their meeting on that dangerous mountain trail. Thomas found himself listening not just to her words, but to the musical quality of her voice, while Elizabeth noticed the way his stern features softened when he spoke about the future they might build together. As Thomas banked the fire for the night and prepared to retreat to the barn, Elizabeth caught his hand. "Thomas, I need you to know, I love my husband deeply. I may never be able to offer you more than friendship and partnership." He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "That's more than I had yesterday and enough for now. Get some rest, Elizabeth. Tomorrow we'll start figuring out how to build a life worth living." September arrived with the crisp promise of autumn, painting the aspen groves in brilliant gold and sending the cattle to seek shelter in the valley's lower pastures. Elizabeth had been at the Double T Ranch for nearly a month, and the transformation was evident not just in her restored health, but in the very atmosphere of the place. The cabin that had once echoed with the hollow silence of solitude now rang with conversation, laughter, and the comfortable sounds of two people learning to share a life. Thomas had converted the storage room into a proper bedroom for Elizabeth, installing a larger window to let in morning light and building a sturdy bed frame to replace his makeshift furniture. Every evening found him crafting something new for the expected baby. A cradle carved from local pine, tiny wooden toys, and soft blankets purchased during his increasingly frequent trips to the distant trading post. "You're spoiling this child before it's even born," Elizabeth teased one evening, watching him sand the final curves of a rocking horse. She sat in the chair by the fire, her hands busy with needlework, while a pot of venison stew simmered on the stove. The domestic scene would have seemed impossible just weeks ago, yet now it felt as natural as breathing. "A child should know it's wanted," Thomas replied, testing the smoothness of the wood with his calloused fingertips. "Besides, I never had much when I was young. Seems right to make sure this little one has everything it needs." Elizabeth set down her sewing, studying his profile in the firelight. Over the past weeks, she had learned fragments of his story. Orphaned at 12, raised by an uncle who viewed him more as free labor than family, working cattle drives until he'd saved enough to claim his own land. He rarely spoke of his past, but she could see the shadows it had left in his determined self-reliance and his wonder at simple domestic pleasures like shared meals and evening conversation. "Thomas," she said softly, "you've given us far more than shelter and safety. You've given us hope for a real future. If this content is being helpful, leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support me." He looked up from his work, their eyes meeting across the warm space between them. Something had been building in these quiet evening moments, an understanding that went deeper than gratitude or mere companionship. Neither had spoken of it directly, but it lived in the way he automatically steadied her when she stood, the way she saved the choicest pieces of meat for his plate, the way they had begun to move around each other with the unconscious choreography of a long married couple. "Elizabeth, I need to tell you something," Thomas said, setting aside his tools and moving to the chair beside hers. "That first day when I found you on the mountain, I told myself I was just doing what any decent man would do. But it wasn't just duty that made me bring you here." She turned to face him fully, her heart beginning to race at the intensity in his voice. "What do you mean?" "I mean that in 15 years of living alone, I never once thought this cabin felt empty until I walked into it with you. I never knew how much I was missing until I heard you humming while you cooked breakfast, or saw you reading by the fire, or watched you plan for your baby's future." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I know it's complicated. I know you're still grieving, James, and I know you didn't come here looking for this, but Elizabeth, I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable and completely without expectation. Elizabeth felt tears spring to her eyes, not of sadness, but of a complex mixture of relief, fear, and something that might have been joy if she allowed herself to acknowledge it. "Thomas, She struggled to find words for the tumult of emotions his confession had unleashed. "I love James with all my heart. He was my first love, my partner in everything we dreamed of building together. And when he died, I thought that part of my life was over forever." Thomas nodded, his thumb tracing gentle circles across her knuckles. "I understand if that's still how you feel, but that's just it," Elizabeth continued, her voice growing stronger. "These past weeks with you, I've begun to feel things I thought I'd never feel again. Not the same as what I had with James, but something different. Something that feels like coming home after being lost for a very long time." The baby chose that moment to make its presence known with a particularly strong kick, causing Elizabeth to gasp and press her hand to her side. Thomas immediately moved closer, his concern evident in every line of his face. "Are you all right? Should I ride for Martha Hendricks?" Elizabeth laughed, catching his hand and placing it where she could feel the baby's movements. "No, just an active little one reminding us it's still here." "Feel that?" Thomas's eyes widened in wonder as he felt the strong movement beneath his palm. That's incredible. How do you stand it? You get used to it, though I suspect this child is going to be as stubborn and strong-willed as its parents. Elizabeth covered his hand with both of hers, holding it against her belly. Thomas, this baby isn't James's child anymore. I mean, biologically it is, but James isn't here to raise it, to teach it, to love it through all the years ahead. If we, could you love a child that isn't yours by blood? Elizabeth, look around this cabin. Every piece of furniture, every tool, every board and nail represents something I built or earned or fought for. None of it came to me by blood or inheritance. But it's mine because I chose it and cared for it and made it part of my life. He lifted their joined hands, pressing a gentle kiss to her fingers. Love isn't about blood. It's about choice and commitment and showing up every day to be what someone needs you to be. The simple truth of his words broke down the last walls Elizabeth had built around her heart. She had been so afraid of betraying James's memory, of somehow diminishing what they had shared by allowing herself to love again. But sitting here with Thomas, feeling her child respond to his gentle touch, she realized that love didn't diminish when it was shared. It multiplied. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. I don't know how or when it happened, but somewhere between that first day and this moment, you became essential to me. Not just because you saved us, but because of who you are, kind and steady and honest, and so completely good that it takes my breath away. Thomas leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers in a gesture of such tender intimacy that Elizabeth felt her heart skip a beat. "So where does that leave us?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I know I want to stay here, to build a life with you, to raise this child together. But I also know I need time to properly mourn the life I lost before I can fully embrace the one I'm finding." "Then we take it slow," Thomas said simply. "We have all the time in the world to figure out what this looks like. For now, it's enough to know that we both want the same thing, a family, a home, a reason to wake up grateful every morning." As if summoned by their conversation about the future, a sharp pain suddenly gripped Elizabeth's abdomen, causing her to cry out and double over in her chair. Thomas was on his feet instantly, his hands gentle but urgent as he helped her breathe through the contraction. "Elizabeth, is it time? Is the baby coming?" She panted through the subsiding pain, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. Yes, I think it might be. Oh, Thomas, it's too early. I'm scared." "Hey, look at me," Thomas said firmly, taking her face in his hands. "You are the strongest person I've ever known. You've survived things that would break most people, and you're going to get through this too. I'm going to ride for Martha Hendricks right now, and by tomorrow morning, we're going to have a baby to spoil with all those toys I've been carving." Another contraction hit, stronger than the first, and Elizabeth gripped his hands with surprising strength. "Don't leave me alone, please. What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing is going to go wrong," Thomas said, with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "But you're right. I'm not leaving you. Martha's daughter, Jenny, can ride just as fast as I can. I'll send her to fetch her mother and stay right here with you." As he quickly saddled his fastest horse and rode toward the Hendricks homestead, Thomas found himself praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in for the safety of the woman and child who had become his whole world. He had faced down mountain lions and survived blizzards that killed lesser men, but the thought of losing Elizabeth and the baby now, just when happiness seemed within reach, terrified him more than any physical danger ever could. The next 12 hours would test everything they had built together, but they would face it as they had faced everything else since that day on the mountain. Together, with courage born of love and hope for the future they were determined to create. The October dawn broke crisp and clear over the Double T Ranch, painting the mountain peaks in shades of pink and gold that seemed to herald something momentous. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with tension and anticipation as Martha Hendricks, a weathered woman whose steady hands had delivered more babies than she could count, moved efficiently around the makeshift birthing room. "She's doing fine, Thomas," Martha called out, as another of Elizabeth's cries echoed through the cabin. First babies take their time, but this little one's in a hurry to meet the world. Won't be much longer now. Thomas paced the main room like a caged wolf, his usual calm completely shattered by his helplessness in the face of Elizabeth's pain. Every cry from the bedroom sent a knife through his heart, and he found himself bargaining with whatever powers might be listening. Take anything from him, his land, his cattle, his own life if necessary, but keep Elizabeth and the baby safe. Thomas McKinnon, you sit yourself down before you wear a hole in that floor, Martha's daughter Jenny commanded from her post by the fire, where she kept water heating and clean linens ready. At 16, Jenny had assisted at enough births to know that anxious fathers, even unofficial ones, could be more trouble than help if they weren't managed properly. I should be doing something, Thomas muttered, but he sank into his chair and buried his head in his hands. She's been laboring for 14 hours. Is that normal? Shouldn't it be over by now? Every birth is different, Jenny assured him. My mama delivered one baby that took 3 days, and another that arrived so fast she barely had time to wash her hands. Elizabeth is strong, and the baby's heartbeat is steady. Trust in the process. As if summoned by their conversation, Martha appeared in the doorway, her sleeves rolled up and her face flushed with exertion but smiling. Thomas, you'd better come say hello to your son. The words hit him like a physical blow. Son, he whispered, rising on unsteady legs. A fine, healthy boy with a set of lungs that'll wake the dead, and a grip that could strangle a bear, Martha laughed. And Elizabeth is asking for you. Thomas moved toward the bedroom in a daze, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Nothing in his life of physical hardship and constant challenge had prepared him for this moment. The transition from solitary rancher to instant father. From a man who had lived 15 years without deep emotional connections to someone whose entire world now revolved around the welfare of a woman and child. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene that would be burned into his memory forever. Elizabeth lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with perspiration and her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes were bright with joy and wonder as she cradled a tiny bundle against her chest. The baby's cries had subsided to small mewling sounds, and Thomas could see one perfect miniature hand waving in the air. Come meet your son, Elizabeth said softly, her voice hoarse but filled with love. Thomas approached the bed on trembling legs, his eyes fixed on the miracle in her arms. The baby was impossibly small, red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair that stuck up at odd angles. As Thomas drew closer, the infant's eyes opened, revealing the deep blue gaze that all newborns shared, and something fundamental shifted in Thomas's chest. He's perfect, Thomas breathed, reaching out tentatively to touch the baby's cheek with one calloused finger. The skin was so soft it seemed impossible, and when the baby instinctively turned toward his touch, Thomas felt tears he hadn't known he was capable of shedding. Would you like to hold him? Elizabeth asked, noting the wonder in Thomas's expression. She had watched him care for injured animals with infinite gentleness, seen him craft delicate toys with hands that could wrestle cattle to the ground, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of this strong, self-sufficient man reduced to awe by a 6-pound baby. Thomas accepted the precious bundle with the same careful attention he gave to handling fine china, his large hands cradling the baby's head and supporting his tiny body with instinctive protectiveness. The baby settled immediately against his chest, as if recognizing the steady heartbeat that would become the rhythm of his childhood. "Hello, little man," Thomas whispered, his voice rough with emotion. I guess I'm your father now. I know that's probably confusing since we just met, but I promise you'll never have to wonder if you're wanted or loved or protected. I've been waiting my whole life to meet you, even though I didn't know it until right now." Elizabeth watched this first bonding between her son and the man who had chosen to become his father, her heart so full it felt ready to burst. This wasn't how she had imagined her child's birth. She had pictured James pacing outside, then rushing in to meet his biological son or daughter. But watching Thomas's face transform with paternal love, she couldn't imagine any other scenario feeling more right. "What should we name him?" she asked, settling back against the pillows as exhaustion finally began to claim her. Thomas looked down at the baby, who had fallen asleep against his chest with the absolute trust that only infants possessed. "I was thinking, James Thomas Morrison McKinnon, to honor both his biological father and his raising father, if that's all right with you." The name brought fresh tears to Elizabeth's eyes, but these were tears of gratitude rather than grief. James would have liked knowing his son would carry his name forward. And Thomas, she reached for his free hand, intertwining their fingers as naturally as breathing. "I can't think of any name I'd rather have our son carry. Our son." The words settled around them like a blessing, acknowledging the family they had become, not through blood or convention, but through choice and love and commitment to each other's welfare. "Mrs. Morrison," Martha interrupted gently from the doorway, "you need to rest now, and this baby needs to nurse. Mr. McKinnon, you can visit with your family again in a few hours." Thomas reluctantly handed the baby back to Elizabeth, but not before pressing a gentle kiss to the tiny forehead. "Welcome to the Double T Ranch, James Thomas. You're going to love it here." As Thomas finally allowed himself to be shooed from the room so Elizabeth could rest, he found himself standing in his kitchen with a cup of coffee he didn't remember pouring, staring out at the land that had suddenly become so much more than just a place to raise cattle. This was his son's inheritance now, the foundation for a family that would continue long after he was gone. Jenny had prepared a celebratory meal that Thomas barely tasted, his mind too full of plans and possibilities to focus on food. He would need to expand the cabin before winter, add proper bedrooms, and maybe a schoolroom where Elizabeth could eventually teach not just their son, but other children in the area. He would increase his herd, plant larger gardens, perhaps even start the horse breeding operation he had always dreamed of, but never had reason enough to pursue. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment below. I love hearing your thoughts and answering questions. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the windows when Martha finally pronounced both mother and baby healthy enough for extended visiting. Thomas returned to the bedroom to find Elizabeth nursing little James, both of them looking peaceful and content in the golden light filtering through the window he had enlarged just for this moment. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling into the chair he had placed beside the bed weeks ago when he was building the room. "Tired, sore, and completely happy," Elizabeth admitted, adjusting the baby's position with the instinctive competence that still amazed him. "Thomas, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." He tensed slightly, recognizing the serious tone that meant she was about to address something important. "Anything. Are you sure about this? Taking on a ready-made family, committing to raising another man's child, tying yourself to a woman who comes with more complications than advantages." Elizabeth's voice was steady, but he could see the vulnerability in her eyes. "Because once we take this step, once we become a real family, there's no going back. I won't put James through the pain of losing a father figure if you decide this is more than you bargained for." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, considering her words with the same careful thought he gave to all important decisions. Then he stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the land that had defined his solitary existence for so many years. "Elizabeth, do you see that oak tree by the north pasture?" he asked, pointing to a massive tree that stood alone against the skyline. "When I first claimed this land, that tree was struck by lightning. Half of it burned away, and I thought about cutting it down, figured it was ruined, useless, but something made me leave it alone." He turned back to face her, his expression serious but warm. "Over the years, I watched that tree heal itself. It grew new branches, stronger ones, that could bear more weight than the original limbs. The trunk thickened around the scar until you could barely see where the damage had been. Now it's the strongest tree on my property, and it provides shade for more cattle than any tree I planted myself. Elizabeth felt her throat tighten as she understood his meaning. We've both been damaged by loss, Thomas continued, moving back to sit beside her. But we're healing together, growing something stronger than what we had before. This family we're building, it's not a consolation prize or a second choice. It's exactly what we were meant to be. He reached out to stroke the baby's soft cheek, marveling again at the perfection of such tiny features. And this little boy isn't a burden or a complication. He's the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I haven't even known him for a full day yet. So, what happens now? Elizabeth asked, settling deeper into the pillows as contentment washed over her. Now, we raise our son, build our life together, and see what other miracles might be waiting for us down the road, Thomas said simply. But first, I think there's something we should make official. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, the only thing of value his uncle had allowed him to keep when he left home. Elizabeth Morrison, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need rescuing or because I need a housekeeper, but because I love you and I want to build something lasting with you. Elizabeth looked down at the ring, then at the man who had saved her life in more ways than one, then at the sleeping baby who would grow up knowing the security of being wanted and loved by both his parents. The answer came from the deepest part of her heart, where grief had finally made room for joy. Yes, Thomas McKinnon, I would be honored to be your wife. See, as the sun set over the Double T Ranch that evening, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, three people who had started as strangers began their life together as a family. The journey ahead would bring its own challenges and sorrows, but it would also bring laughter and growth and the deep satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful with someone you love. In the years that followed, little James would grow up strong and confident under the steady guidance of the man he called Papa, while Elizabeth would find her calling as a teacher for the children of settlers who gradually populated the valley. Thomas would expand his ranch into one of the most prosperous in the territory, but his greatest pride would always be the family that gathered around his table each evening, sharing the stories of their day and planning for the future they were creating together. The lone rancher had found his purpose in protecting a pregnant widow from a mountain lion, but what he had really saved was his own lonely heart. And in return, Elizabeth and little James had given him the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that love multiplied when it was shared, and that the strongest foundations were built not on solitude, but on the willingness to open your heart to the possibility of something better. What was your favorite part? Leave your comment below and let's talk about it. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next videos.